This is One Ogden. I'm John Miles. Doug Gibson is a prolific local writer on his blogs like Plan 9 Crunch and Culture of Mormonism, and in books like Tales from 2-Bit Street and Beyond, Parts 1 and 2. He held several positions with the Standard Examiner, including Editorial Page Editor, until he left in 2016.
Originally, I was a poli-sci major.
Oh, okay.
I thought, how can I make any money at this? All right. so I switched to journalism, and I got a degree in journalism from BYU.
Oh, okay. And so, but like, you wouldn't have gone to journalism without at least a bit of a passion for writing, right?
Yeah, but I was also a political nut. I mean, I cried when Ronald Reagan didn't get the nomination in 1976, okay? So I always loved journalism, too. This is really silly, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I used to make up stories when I was a kid and write them like they were newspaper articles on a typewriter.
So, have you ever written fiction? Like, have you ever been a fiction guy?
I've written a lot of fiction. I've actually written an unpublished novel. It's probably best it's unpublished.
Uh-huh.
But I've had about 12 short stories published in anthologies, and I have another one coming out. Believe it or not, it's about Ed Wood. It's an Ed Wood anthology. I mean, you know, the internet and the world today provides a lot of genres, you can get. Yeah. And I've had about 6 or 7 essays published in books too.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so I've had a lot of success. I mean, regional, but I've had a lot of success in writing.
Uh-huh,
okay.
Yeah. But writing a book about Ed Wood, like what you say about the internet is true, but it almost feels like it's all been covered, How do you find enough for a book that's not been covered about Ed Wood?
There's so much. In a case like Ed Wood, you got this guy who made a few movies that he made cult films because you can't replicate them, okay? You can laugh at them, you can say they're crappy, you can say this Plan 9 from Outer Space is the worst thing I've ever seen, but you cannot replicate a cult film, and that is the key. People need to understand that. There are tons and tons and tons of derivative crap out there in movies, but a cult film, whether it be Ed Wood, Andy Milligan, Herschel Gordon Lewis, or anybody else you want to think about, John Waters or something like that, they can't really replicate what they put on the screen. And as for Ed Wood, he had this mysterious life where he made these movies and he sunk eventually into pornography, okay? And he died at the age of 53 because he just drank too much, kicked out of his house. That there's so many things that you don't know about his life, and people are constantly trying to dig stuff up like that. I'm a huge Bela Lugosi fan. I mean, I live and breathe Bela Lugosi. Okay. And there are some guys, Gary Don Rhodes is another guy, and Bill Kaffenberger, I think, who are going out into Hungary and are searching to find areas of his life that nobody ever knew about. So you really can unearth things about people despite the internet, because half what's in the internet might not be true anyways. Mm-hmm. So you go out there and do what they call shoe leather reporting, and you find some stuff. You're able to do these things. You're able to find things about people.
So how long have you been writing about film?
Well, I guess you would start. I've done it for a long time, but I guess we started a blog. Steve Stones is an artist, and he's an adjunct at Weber State. And we started a blog called Plan 9 Crunch in 2008. We've had probably more than 1,000 posts now. And we just started writing about the films we love to see. I mean, some cults are pretty big, like an Ed Wood cult, and some cults are pretty small, like an Andy Milligan cult. But we wrote about these films, we talked about them, and people like the thing about cult is people like to talk about it over and over and over and over, and they dig the minutia, okay, of this stuff if you're really into it. And so we never run out of things to write about. In fact, I'm reviewing the 1955 Miracle on 34th Street. No one has ever seen. There's a TV show. The one that everybody's seen is the 1947 classic one with Maureen O'Sullivan and Edmund Gwynn. And I thought it'd be fun to let people know there's another one out there. There's actually 3 or 4 out there, but this one was on TV and a big deal in 1955.
I'm guessing you guys are just like hanging out, watching those movies and stuff.
Yeah,
and
every Friday, Steve and I watch a film together. And the beautiful thing about a cult film is you can watch it over and over. And I think I've watched Plan 9 from Outer Space probably 185 times in my lifetime. And you talk about it, you see something. Have you heard of Troll 2?
Yeah.
Troll 2 has a cult. In fact, in 2008, we went to where it was filmed in Morgan, where they had Nilbog, which is gobbling backwards. That's the whole Troll 2 is about it's an anti-vegetarian tale about goblins that turn you into vegetarians and eat you. But you can't replicate this film, all right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can laugh at it. Darren Ewing, who I don't know if he still lives in Ogden, but he lives in northern Utah, is one of the stars of it. And they had what's that? The place where artists have a big thing they can go to. They had a Troll 2 convention a couple of years ago.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's just these things hang on. People make them live on, basically.
Well, and like Troll 2 and Plan 9 you mentioned, those are even kind of like Utah cult kind of
Well,
movies,
Plan
aren't
9
they?
is more Southern California.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. You're thinking of Plan 10 from Outer Space, which came out about 20 years ago, which is a Utah movie.
Oh, okay.
And in
Okay.
fact, the star writes, I think she writes, I can't remember her name now, but she writes for the Salt Lake Tribune. And Trent Harris, who made the movie, he's also made Reuben and Ed, which is a cult film.
Yeah, right.
I think they write for the Trib now or something like that.
Huh.
They're not making movies, yeah. That's a definite Utah thing.
Yeah.
And Troll 2 is a Utah thing, although it's all over the country. I mean, there's fanatical Troll 2 fans in California, New York, things all over the world.
Yeah. And so, like, is there criteria for a cult film? Is it just something that people ended up gravitating to for some reason?
The thing is, a cult film grabs you because of the director's approach to how they're putting it on the screen. And I told you, the key thing is it cannot be duplicated. Like, people have tried to make sequels to these movies, okay?
Yeah.
But when you're deliberately making a cult film, you're not making a cult film. A cult film has to be unintentionally created. And it has to, my friend Steve calls it a malformed puppy that you grow to love, all right? More or less, and you take care of. And you Surreal is probably also a thing when you're thinking about cult films. They're like from another, it's almost like a different dimension. I like to think of the term slipstream, which means several different ideas and existences and get merged into one thing sometimes when you make a film, and it leaves this kind of impression on you. There are recent cult films. One's called The Room.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of it, but I do find it hilarious. Okay. Tommy Wiseau, I think, is the guy that directed that. And so cult films can come up, and they there's a book, a guy named Danny Perry wrote a book called Cult Films, cult movies or films in the 80s, and he had 150 of them mentioned. They went from John Waters' what's it called, Pink Flamingos, to The Wizard of Oz, okay? To Plan 9 from Outer Space, to The Searchers even, all right? So even mainstream films can have cult if they can just, if they just have that idea that you can't replicate it.
Yeah. And so Plan 9 Crunch is a reference to Plan 9, the movie,
Yeah, Steve
right?
Steve does a lot of the genre art, and one is Plan 9 Crunch, and it has Tor Johnson in it and all the other characters. Tor Johnson's that big Swedish wrestler. You probably recognize the face, but it's called Plan 9 Crunch, and it's sort of our logo, and we just call it plan9crunch.blogspot.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys just, like, is there a schedule to that? You just kind of, when you have it?
Now we've probably gone down from like putting a lot on a year to about 30 now, but at least 2 or 3 times a month they come out, and there's not really a schedule. I'm trying to do a couple in December. We had a guy, what I love is old 19th century literature. So I have a friend in Japan who puts together anthologies of Christmas ghost stories and Christmas tales. So I did a blog post about those, trying to tub thump it a bit, for the guy. And I'm doing this Miracle on 34th Street thing. But we have done so many Christmas blog posts. We're running out of things to think about, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you've got other blogs, too. You kind of have the same...
Yeah, I had one on politics that I barely do now. I had one on... I have one called Plan 9 Crunch of the Day, okay? That we were trying back in 2008 and 2009 to do a daily one. That didn't quite work out. Sometimes I'll go back to it and share something, and it still gets about 50 hits a day, that blog. But normally they've all been transposed over to Plan 9 Crunch, the main blog. But the other one that probably people haven't heard about is Culture of Mormonism.
Yeah.
.blogspot.com.
Yeah.
And I used to write for the Standard Examiner when I was the editor a column. Well, it was called Current. No, it was an online magazine called Currents, and I wrote standard works, and I wrote about religion, either history or some kind of theology thing. And Cal Grandal, who was the cartoonist then, did cartoons for it. And so probably did about 500 of those, and about maybe 100 were junk, but 400 were pretty good. And so I moved those over, and I still do about 20 a year of book reviews or whenever I'm thinking of something, and it's all about religion. And my idea of religion is transparency. And so I like to do about history and things like that. And there's a lot of good biographies and nonfiction books that come out. One was Vengeance is Mine or something. It's a new book on the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Yeah.
And I did a review of that for it. And
I read that. It was really good.
Thanks. And then there was this movie. This is a cult film. I got to do both, okay? A movie called Coriantumr, A Tale of Nephite Love was made.
A Tale of Nephite Love?
Nephite Love, or Nephite,
wow.
something like that. I may be butchering the title a little bit, but I wanted to see that for years because it's based on a book that a guy named B.H. Roberts, a general authority, wrote, okay? And it was made, and it was a huge flop, okay? It only made money in the Mormon corridor. And it was made like around 1930. It's very theatrical. It's like a silent movie with some dialogue, okay? And I wanted to see it for so long. And BYU found it, cleaned it up, and they haven't released it. BYU should release it, but, but anyway, so they show it occasionally at the Varsity Theater. So I went, and it was packed in March, and I got to see this movie. And the funny thing is, do you know what pre-code means? Pre-code films. Pre-code films were before they clamped down.
Right.
And so this movie,
like the studio code or something.
Yeah. And they had a guy named Breen and Will Hayes and Joseph Breen who clamped down. And after 1936, you thought that people didn't have sex anymore, okay? So the thing is, but this movie about Coriantumr, it's about Coriantumr, who is a son of Alma, and he's sort of fascinated by this courtesan or something who in another city. So the movie is a little bit sexy, okay? I mean, it's very pre-code. Yeah. It's very moralistic. The acting is very over the top. It's a total cult film, and I'm so happy I saw it. And we did a big, long blog post in March or so about it.
Yeah.
It's something that could have gone on Plan 9 Crunch, but because it has this thing, I wanted to put it on the blog, the Culture of Mormonism blog. And then there's also movies that involve the Mormon faith, which I have put on the blog called... There's a movie called Trapped by the Mormons that was very anti-Mormon, 1922. And there's another one, the name escapes me. This is on the blog that I can't remember the name, but it was Cecil B. DeMille made it. It was a really huge anti-Mormon film made in 1916 that was very popular. And that I was able to see on YouTube. YouTube is an interesting thing because sometimes you'll see something on YouTube and then someone will yank it off. But there's a blog post both on Culture of Mormonism and Plan 9 Crunch on that. And then there's a guy in the 1970s who made a whole bunch of fire and brimstone Christian films for a director who used to make Nudie Cuties about 20 years earlier. That was shown in southern, his name was, I love this name, Estes W. Perkel, okay? And, but he made a bunch of films like The Burning Hell, and anti-communism films that were very, very poor, but they were a big hit in foot washing Baptist congregations in the South. And they're hysterical. I did a whole blog post about those movies, which have actually gotten some release because they become cult films too. All right, so there's a widespread thing out there. There was even a film made by the Mormons in the 19-teens about either, I can't remember, the beginning of the church or about the Book of Mormon, but it's lost, unfortunately. Most silent films are lost because they didn't see a marketable value for them. They were very short-sighted.
Yeah. And I'm wondering about like the film culture around here has like really suffered, right? I mean, you used to have even Tower. Here you'd have places you could see that kind of stuff, but there's not much of that anymore.
Well, there's still the Salt Lake Film Society in Salt Lake, and they do a good job. But the Tower is still hanging around, but I think it's being renovated right now. But the Blue Mouse is gone, which was a wonderful place in Salt Lake. I saw one of the most repellent films, though, I ever hated, called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer there.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a cult film, but I can pass on that one.
Yeah.
There used to be more people. I think it's there. like that little art house across the street here, they sort of gave up. They showed a lot of movies, but now they just rent it out.
Yeah.
And I can't remember her name, but a woman started a bookstore just down the street here called Booked on 25th, which didn't make it, which was a lot of fun. But this place here still has some culture with it, And
yeah, I was wondering if they were even still there because like the signs are still up, but
Booked is.
No, I mean our
yeah,
house.
yeah, it's rented out to people now.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. If I had the money, I'd buy that and start a film society. But
Yeah.
knock on wood, right? But there is a lot of people here who like this stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know what Weber State does. I don't know if they have film societies. The historic thing we have on Washington will occasionally show good movies sometimes.
Yeah.
They used to show old silent movies a generation ago. We'd go to see them. And Sundance is gone from now here, which is a bit of a shame.
Right.
You might have touched on something when you said we have the internet. There's so much stuff, Mm-hmm. There are movies that in the 1990s, I would pay $25, $30 for a murky VHS that are easily available now on the internet somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these film things are struggling because they can't get people to buy them if you can get them on the streamer now.
Yeah. Right. It's tough. It's like I feel like you need that community for some of those films to even become cult films in the first place. You know?
I'll tell you something. My blogger thinks I'm a little silly. My wife thinks I'm really silly for this. But if I see a movie like Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, okay, which is a cult film and a lot of fun to watch, if I see it on one of these small TV stations, which it was on it's on Cozy or something, I will sit there, go out of my way to watch it because I know other people are watching it, okay? I feel some kind of community there. Other people scoff at that, but I really think I try to do that.
Do you ever submit the things that you write for the blogs? Do you ever submit those other places to be published? It's just all kind of for the blog.
What have I done for movies trying to get published? There is a place called the Moderate Voice blog that basically will publish anything I want to publish. All right. And because so that goes, some of those are cross-posted.
Yeah.
But mainly when I'm trying to submit, I'm trying to write. It's the fiction and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or essays.
And so, what is your published fiction? Go back to that.
Well, I have about 12 stories. A lot of them are with the Tales books. And the Tales books, the first two were Tales on Two-Bit Street 1 and 2, and they are ghost legends and stories based on that. And then there was Tales of the Wasatch and Beyond, which is tales of basically all of Utah. And I wrote a story about Thistle, which is that town which is almost a ghost town.
Yeah, by Spanish Fort?
It's out there on the way to the middle of Utah, where they have a temple at Manti. It's on the way to Manti.
Yeah.
And then there's a Tales of the publisher. It's a small publisher, but there's one about Tales from the Canyon, and also and I have a couple of stories in those. All right, also, and then there's then there's a whole bunch of other stories, like there's one about fleeting moments where like you have an experience that changed your life. And one of my favorite is, and it's for all these books are for sale at Queen Bee, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And they one is called The Best Worst Christmas, and this was a chance to write comedy. And so I wrote a story about this old-fashioned Christmas carol that my father coveted and its ultimate demise, all right? And so that was a lot of fun. And then I wrote a couple of books. They published a book about the year we lost, which was about the year of COVID and how you dealt with it. And these are from people all over the world. It's not just northern Utah the stories come from. And I got to write about the isolation my father had experienced before he died and things like that. And then there's another one that came out about, this one I think was about love stories, all right? And I didn't write about our love story. I think it'd be a little bit, we have a wonderful love story, but it'd be a little sad if we put it on print. I wrote about my parents, okay? My dad was a dirt poor kid from Alabama. My mom was a foster child in L.A., and they met at a baseball stadium. So that was fun.
Wow.
My wife is from Hungary, okay? And the latest book that came out from this publisher is Coming to America. What's it called? Coming to America, Modern Day Tales of Immigration. And my wife, who immigrated from Hungary, her father was a dissident and was spent time in a concentration camp in Hungary after the '56 revolution. She wrote about her experiences trying to make it to America. So it was an opportunity for her to write something, okay? and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so
it's a lot of nonfiction short stories?
yeah, but I've been published elsewhere in. I have an essay on my son's life. We had a son who died of hypoplastic left heart syndrome, and that's in a book called Moth and Rust: Latter-day Saint Experiences on Death, published by Signature. And I've had stuff published in Mormon publications like Dialogue, and I can't remember what it's called now. Another publication too, so reviews and things like that, and another book also on death that was published by a publisher in Texas, and then I have a book coming out from a publisher in Pittsburgh. Well, it's a short story in a book on the Ed Wood anthology of short stories based on him. Yeah, so I've probably been published about 15 or 16 times, and I joined the Utah League of Writers, which I thought was helpful because there's a lot of, people read your stuff and I had a book published by some publishers in Idaho. It's either Idaho or Logan on Mormon missionary stories too recently, and that was fun. And I've started to write dark horror, but I haven't found a publisher for a story called The Demon in the Cemetery, but I'm looking.
Oh. And how does a writer do that? I assume at first you sort of have some pieces that you shop around, but later when you're talking about these, there are these themed books coming out, you must have kind of heard.
Well, the themed books, I get solicited on those, fortunately, because I've been doing them so long now. Someone will say, hey, there's a story. But there's a website called Duotrope, where you can learn more about trying to get maybe an agent to help you, and there's more Writers Digest where you can solicit stuff. All right, they're out there. Utah League of Writers will give you lots of good information on finding editors and publishers, and they're constantly mentioning contests or
that sounds cool.
or anthologies seeking submissions. I entered a contest and it was fun. I think I won second on it, and that was a lot of fun. But then I put my Demon in the Cemetery, didn't even place. Okay, so you learn, and stuff like that. And I have a really good friend. I want to tub thump him a little bit. His name is Pat Nilsson. He writes under the title Dean Patrick, and he is the best dark horror writer I've ever met. He lives in Morgan. He's written the first book is called The Lady Mephistopheles, about a demon. It's a 3-part series. So I gave him a little bit of tub thump there. He's a superb writer and edits a lot of my stuff, which I really appreciate.
Oh, great. Well, and I was wondering, because I saw, you've been going around with the other authors from Tales from Two-Bit Street, Volume 2. So that's fairly recent, isn't it?
Yeah, and those Tales books, Drini Hatting, who used to live in Morgan and then lived on this street, and now is with her, one of her daughters and her son. They need help. They need some assistance. Is living in Gig Harbor, Washington. She is the one who's put these all together, all right? And the Tales books have sold over 20,000 copies, which is pretty good for an independent publisher.
Yeah.
The books sell pretty well. It's a labor of love. I don't know if she would be able to tell you. I don't even know if they make how much profits they make, all right? Because but they've been so much fun to write, and so much fun to get your creativity flowing and things like that.
Yeah. I was curious about that, just a little bit about your process. It seems like you're constantly writing, and I was wondering if the blogs are you're tricking yourself into making sure you're writing every day, or is it more you're writing every day and you need somewhere to put them?
The key to writing is to sit down and write. Okay, I mean, so many people say I'm going to do it tomorrow. I don't want to sound condescending, but that you have to write. You have to just do it. And writing is the beautiful thing about writing is you don't have to go to class or something. Charles Bukowski is one of my favorite writers. And if you haven't read Post Office, just a fantastic book, and his poetry is great. Yeah. And he didn't go to college. He was a mailman for about 12 years. And he also bummed around the country. And so anybody can write. It gets better with practice. Putting words on paper is a good thing to do. Yeah. Because you get better.
And so was all of your early writing journalism, is that really where you wet your teeth?
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote an article way back for the Daily Universe about Ed Wood. Not Daily Universe, the Daily Chronicle. Oh, okay. I went to grad school. I didn't graduate for the graduate degree, but I went to grad school at the University of Utah. And I wrote for the Chronicle, and I wrote a thing way back in 1991 or something about Ed Wood, and I found it in one of their archives. That was pretty cool. But I was a journalist. I really wasn't a writer. I wanted to be a writer and things like that. I would occasionally write stuff, but it was only things I had published, and I don't know, they called it the event back then. It's no longer there. The City Weekly type thing was reviews. I was a journalist. I was a business journalist in the 90s in Boston, believe it or not.
Oh.
And also in Logan. And then I found the Standard instead, almost 20 years there. My goal was always to be an editorial writer. I had to work myself into it. I'd volunteer to write editorials. I'd volunteer to write columns. And lo and behold, when Don Porter left, I managed to get the job, all right, and everything. So that's what I wanted to do in journalism. And it was a good run. I really enjoyed it.
But so you studied journalism at BYU, but then went out to Boston?
Trying to get started in the business. My first job was, believe it or not, at the Ely Daily Times in Nevada for a 5-day a week, which is probably a weekly now. In fact, I think it is, paper, where I was the reporter I was the sports editor / general assignment reporter. I was there for a year, and then I sort of stumbled around for 3 years, working at the Chrony, which is the Chronicle, taking grad courses, thinking about becoming a teacher. But then I found an ad for a business writer for the publication in Logan, took it, and they were sold out. But before I was only off a month, a place in Boston asked me to work for Mutual Fund Market News. So I went there for about 19 months, and I saw an ad for the the Standard Examiner, and I got the job. And so I was there until 2016. The election in 2016 is when I left. And it was just getting to the point where the industry was contracting. I hadn't lost my job, but I could see it was going to not be there much longer,
Yeah.
And the IRS turned out to be a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it drives me crazy, all right? But it's a good, well-paying job. All right?
Yeah. Well, and I always thought, as far as jobs that let you, write on your free time, get your work done, and then.
Yeah, the great thing about the IRS is they don't want you to take your work home.
Yeah.
The Standard, particularly last year, I was always doing stuff in the evening, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Working a swing shift, though, gives you a chance to exercise, gives you a chance to write during the day, kick back, and stuff like that.
Right. What did you cover at the Standard?
Well, first I was a copy editor at first, page designer, copy editor, and then I became the assistant news editor, which I helped put together the paper. All right, made the decisions.
Yeah, you go from copy editor to assistant news editor?
It's not. It's actual kind of a trajectory thing, although there are a lot of copy editors. But and then I started writing, editorials when they wanted to and things like that. And when the one person left, I didn't get the news editor job, which I did apply for. I didn't really want it, but you look up for something. I wanted to be then I was offered the job of assistant editorial page editor, which is what I'd wanted for a long time. And I got that. And then when Don Porter left, I became the editorial page editor. That was a great job. I mean, they don't have editorial page editors now. They just write it. They don't even write editorials anymore. They slap together an editorial page in 10 minutes by putting a couple of syndicated columnists or somebody from Weber State. No disrespect for Weber State. They got great columnists. But they just slap it together, put a few cartoons on. You don't get many letters anymore.
Yeah.
I can tell they hold them to put 3 or 4 in, for a while. But it was a full job. I mean, you had assistants who culled through the letters, and there were a lot back then. And then you had to deal with the editorial board, which met and hashed out opinions and stuff like that. And you had a full-time cartoonist in Cal Grondel. Cal Grondel was an interesting individual. I love him to death. He was one of the most delightfully eccentric people I ever met. And you'd talk with Cal and go through the ideas, and you go through the letters, and you'd put together the columns, that you had to write, and also the online editions we had called Currents. There's just so many things to do that today would take 10 minutes.
I mean, they would take 10 minutes today, but is there a place you go for editorials now?
Local editorials, where are they? I mean, look, they still have guys like VJ Mather writes occasionally in the Standard. He's a retired professor. I'm trying to think if there's any conservatives who write columns. There is a woman who's an advisor. What is her name? She writes very funny columns, all right? And I can't remember her name right now, who I like. And then there are some good columnists. John Kowalski's wife, Brenda, writes a column. There's Nancy something still writes a column. She was writing them back in 1997 when I showed up. So there are good columns, but they're slim pickings. Ryan writes a religion column. And then there's a guy from Provo who writes sort of the opposite of Ryan. He's sort of con to the church and Ryan's pro to the church, which is cool. I believed in having both sides when I was editorial page editor. I'm trying to think. There's a woman named Meg Sanders who writes pretty good slice of life columns. So there's still people out there.
I see.
Yeah, but there's not as many as I used to. We used to have what we called Top of Utah Voices, and they would write weekly, different person all the time and stuff like that. And you had more political columns. There's a guy named Rick Jones, a friend of mine, who he runs a lot of time as a Democrat in Utah. He writes a column occasionally. I still see him there.
Yeah.
You know, one of the funny things is, well, it's bittersweet of being an editorial page editor, is you occasionally will see someone who often wrote letters to the editor in the obituary section. It's sort of bittersweet, you know.
Yeah. Right. Like their last editorial.
Well, I remember these people because they used to contribute letters to the editor, you know.
But back when you were doing it, the paper was actually putting resources into generating these stories pretty regularly. Now it's kind of more of an ad hoc. People are just kind of submitting them.
We always had at least one person from Uber State writing. Now we have 3 or 4, which is not a bad thing. It's just they're going where they know they're going to get them, all right? We would have people come in for Top Utah Voices. We would have a whole thing where they would audition to be in it, all right? And when we had an editorial board, we'd want to have 1 or 2 people. Well, we'd have 3 or 4 people out of the community, and we'd have like 15 or 16 were asked to be in, and we had to cull them. Those days are gone, okay?
Right.
I applaud the Standard for one thing. It's owned by a penny-pinching firm in West Virginia, but they are still publishing a paper 6 days a week. The Trib and Des News don't do that anymore. They're just strictly online, except for one time, maybe a week.
That's an interesting point, because I always imagine you knowing what it was like and seeing it now, and probably seeing that there is much more opportunity for news, much more news going on, but the coverage is way down. I imagine you like ripping your hair out about it and wishing things were getting covered.
Well, I don't want to be one of those curmudgeons that says, "Oh, those old days, yeah, they don't know what they're doing now." But they are dealing with the reality. They don't have classified ads like they used to. They don't have national advertising like they used to. It is the ironic thing today is you buy a Standard Examiner, it's a fortune. I think it's like $1.50 or something. And that's because they're not getting well, I don't know. I shouldn't say if I don't know for sure. But it's a lot more expensive now because they don't have the ad revenue they used to have.
That's interesting.
That's the problem. The internet really hurt the newspaper industry because it didn't react to it immediately.
Right. But you're kind of saying that as far as how the whole industry is doing, Standard isn't doing so bad.
It's surviving.
Right.
What newspapers like the Post and the Times, they have a wide circulation online. And this is a controversial thing I'm going to say, but I believe it, is newspapers now used to be biased on their editorial section. I can't tell you how many times I had to tell people, it's the editorial page, all right? Don't tell me we have a liberal bias because it's on the editorial page, all right? Newspapers today that kind of have to slant their news a little bit to the left or the right because they will lose subscribers. The New York Times has a subscriber base that's probably pretty heavy, overwhelmingly liberal, all right? So there are new issues and challenges facing, and on the right, you have the Washington Examiner and something like that. National Review is a perfect example of a newspaper, not a newspaper, but a periodical that has suffered because it hasn't been slavishly devotion to Donald Trump, all right?
So sort of in an effort to make news more marketable, they've made it more editorialized so they can appeal to an audience.
Yeah, I read the Washington Post daily, and the stories are, if you read between, you don't even have to read between the lines sometimes, all right? Okay, but the Weekly Standard went out of business because it was anti-Trump. So it happens on the right, too.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So I didn't realize that you were at the Standard clear until 2016. Was it sort of that they were downsizing over time?
I was there for 19 years, and in 2015, I was thinking of leaving, but Greg Halling, a really hard worker who's now he's in Washington.
Yakima, I think.
Yakima, Washington.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, do you want to be a senior reporter?" And I said, "Don't make me a senior reporter, but I'll be happy to be a reporter." All right. And I had worked during the 15. I'd also worked for a while on the entertainment section called Go, which is now no longer. Go is gone. Yeah. But it was a lot of fun. And I said, I want to be a reporter, and I had fun. I hadn't done straight reporting for a long time, and I got to cover the elections. I got to cover just a whole bunch of Davis County and things like that. And I was also occasionally writing editorials I was on the ed board too. But someone like Greg might say, oh no, it was never considered. But no, I knew that I wasn't going to be there forever, all right? I could see the handwriting because the salary, frankly, was a little bit too large, I think, all right? And so I did an article, I did a feature on the IRS. And I thought to myself, wow, maybe this is a possibility, okay? Because I figured I'd be gone by 2017 or something, or at least sometime that year. And so I put in an application. I had to go to usajobs.org and everything, or Gov, whatever it is. And I didn't hear from him for a long time.
Yeah.
And then I heard from him in sections, all right? And so then I had to go online one time and deal with a phone call. Then I went down to the main office and had a picture taken. I figured, hey, this is starting to happen. And then once I got a tentative offer, I knew I would have it. So I gave notice at the Standard and started in December of 2016. The very last thing I covered was the election. On election day 2016, I was out there at 7 a.m. talking to people after they were voting and stuff like that. I noticed, you probably know I'm a conservative, okay? I'm not necessarily a Trump supporter, but I'm a conservative. But I noticed a dislike for the media from people on the right. And it's happened, and it's kind of unfortunate. But even from the left now, you get the same thing. When the president takes a position on Israel, he's getting shunned by the people on the left right now, okay? And things like that. And I think it's because of things have gotten so, I don't want to fret. I like conflict, but things have gotten so where I don't think people who are in Congress can sit down and have a drink afterwards anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of unfortunate, One of the things that made me most happy in the world was to give up cable news. I mean, I read Real Clear Politics daily, which is, I think, a pretty good source. And I read the Washington Post. I read the Salt Lake Tribune and stuff. I go through Twitter, which is X now, I guess. But you got these people preening on these shows, which to me, their monetary system is geared toward keeping people in a state of anger. Okay, so that's a problem too. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's what I hear from everybody who knows news, is you have to consume a bunch of sources, sometimes conflicting sources, and then evaluate it for yourself.
Well, if you want to have fun sometime, I haven't watched for a while, but if something major happens in the news, like the Colorado thing might have been a very interesting example. You could watch Fox for an hour. You could watch MSNBC for an hour. They both may be technically right, but they're all covered from a different perspective. Right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But then you were basically right about the trajectory of the Standard, right? Like they've just been sort of peeling off all of your coworkers.
Yeah, well, you could see it happening, and you could see them trying to stop it. And when it happened, it sort of just happened. It didn't collapse when I left, all right? And it still hasn't collapsed. It's still hanging in there. But things went down, and then you had Sandusky still owning it for a while. But then when they sold to Ogden newspapers, which is ironically called Ogden
Right.
newspapers, most of the editorial staff left immediately because they knew they wouldn't be around anyways because they had a totally different ideological. What Greg Holling tried to do, and he might disagree with me, I think he was trying to get 30,000 people who would be devoted followers of the newspaper. And even that's hard. I think the standard circulation now is about 10,000. Okay, and when I was there in our heyday, it was tied with the Deseret News in the 60,000 level, or something. But it's just realistic. You don't have the revenue service, and younger kids. I think my kids read the paper. Okay,
yeah, right.
I mean, my kids they look on a screen, and the Standard needs to hang around because it doesn't have a website.
Yeah.
No offense, truth. It doesn't have a website that you can market by itself. Okay, it's something.
To me, that seems like a major opportunity here. There's all of these terrific writers, terrific investigators, all kind of retired. They just need a platform. They need somebody to build a platform.
You know what? A lot of people have tried. I mean, there's been 25th Street Papers.
Yeah.
Don Porter wrote movie reviews for one, I think, after he left. It didn't survive.
Yeah.
You had the woman, I can't remember her name. She started only in Ogden. I think she started a magazine. I can't remember the Ogden Source or something.
Yeah.
It didn't survive.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone's got to figure out how to do it, Because I think Ogden is, particularly this street and other areas, is a wonderful place of culture in this place.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to see more bookstores.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bookstore in South Ogden that was a coffee shop also, and I'm terrible. It's right by the Javier's. Weisberg, wonderful place. I know the author. She retired. The person who bought it just couldn't keep it going. All right. So all you've got now is Queen Bee, and you've got places like this that sometimes sell stuff also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so are you working on any blog posts right now?
Yeah, like I think I'm going to do something on this Miracle on 34th Street, and then I also assign Steve stuff sometimes. He can do his own stuff if he wants to, but sometimes he'll take an assignment from me. There's always things we want to do. I mean, there's an endless amount of stuff. We don't just do cult films. We also do the old silent movies and the horror films. I think they're cult films anyways, but stuff like that. And so we'll be doing lots of stuff right now. In fact, we'll probably sit down at the end of the year and map out some things we want to do for Plan 9 Crunch. And I want to write a blog post. I've been reading a lot of biographies, and I read biographies from Signature and also from University of Utah and stuff like that. Have you heard of the difference between archival expose biographies and hagiography biographies? Okay, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No.
An archival expose is something that places something in its worst context, all right? And then the hagiography is something that is totally sycophantic to the subject. And when I'm reading a biography of Joseph W. Smith, who was the sixth prophet of the church, he was an explosive personality of man. He lost his temper. He got in fistfights and beat up people as a youngster. His first marriage was a disaster, and he may have abused her, okay, at the time. But he also had a lot of good things about him, okay? And he was the face of polygamy, too. So the LDS Church will have this series they had of prophets. Oh, I could get in trouble for this, but okay, what the heck. And so Joseph F. Smith's book was a hagiography, okay? It portrayed him as a kindly uncle. It didn't, but then if you go to an anti-Mormon source, okay, and there are a lot of them out there, they will portray the archival expose. They will focus only on the negative aspects of the person's life. Well, people are complex. They have different layers. They have good and bad, and they create a whole. And so what I love about these biographies that come from Signature and also from university presses, or sometimes from Oxford Press also, is they are balanced portrayals that show richly the life of a person. And I try to review books for my Mormon blog that come from these subjects. In fact, a new one's coming out on Bruce R. McConkie, and I can't wait to read that because he was a very controversial figure in the Mormon hierarchy among people, you know. I mean, beloved as an apostle.
Right.
And so I want to do a blog post on that, on exploring archival exposés and why they're wrong, but why hagiographies are wrong also. And you have to look, because a lot of people, I think, in the LDS Church, younger people leave the church. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. Two of my people, they're not hostile, but they don't go to church anymore. I would think that you need to know everything about the history, not just the sanitized version, because if you're not prepared to understand that everyone in this world is a sinner and people are good and bad, and you have these unrealistic expectations put upon you by people, maybe not necessarily they didn't mean to, but the way they did it can be really soul crushing to learn things about things that you weren't told, you know.
Yeah. It's what I really love about the culture of Mormonism is it is sort of this, you know, let's talk about it, warts and all. And I think you're right that is what a person sees, that they're not being told the whole story, and then they wonder what else they're not being told. And so you talk about all of it.
They can be exploited too.
Yeah.
It goes both ways, but they can be exploited, all right, on those things. I'm an active Mormon. I have a temple recommend. So, and I guess what you call me a true believing Mormon, but I believe in transparency. We used to have the LDS Church come to us. We could never get them to provide a columnist, you know. But you know, I do think there have been some movement toward transparency in the last generation from the LDS Church, though.
Yeah, right.
They have those more Joseph Smith papers, and the new editor of Deseret Book has talked about wanting to be more transparent too.
All right. Well, I think I hit all my questions.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a
Can
lot.
I just say one thing? Shout out to my wife, Cotty. And she's wonderful. Okay.
Great. I love it. Thank you.